Welcome to the newest episode of Friday edition of Beatin' and Bangin'. I'm your host, Kyle Dalton. In today's video, we'll discuss the interesting remarks from Larry McReynolds yesterday on Ty Majeski's penalty. We'll take a closer look at that penalty and how NASCAR's penalty structure says everything you need to know about what the sanctioning body prioritizes. We'll listen to some strong words from Denny Hamlin's crew chief Chris Gabehart on fan expectations. And I have to let you hear the comments of Shane Van Gisbergen this week from a podcast on his reaction to what happened on Sunday. And finally, I'll highlight some of the remarks from the State of the Sport address in Phoenix. However, before we get to that, I want to go back to Wednesday and the Dale Jr. download, just because of the breaking news Jr. shared on the podcast where he had all four Championship 4 Xfinity Series drivers on the show. Of course, they talked about the drivers' seasons and each of their hopes for the weekend in Arizona. But the conversation took a funny turn at one point when Earnhardt got sidetracked by something he noticed.
Been sitting here 30 minutes and just noticed that you got a black eye.
Yeah, I got, a little bit right
that
there.
Slap gave you a black eye?
I guess I bruise easy.
What, do you have a ring on? What the Did y'all see that?
Hey.
I love how Custer said he bruises easy. It's almost like he had to say that about his black eye after saying this on Saturday.
I mean, it is what it is. I think at the end of the day, he put us in the wall a few times this year. He kept us from winning a race, I feel like, at Kansas. And he used the bumper on me. I used the bumper on him. I don't know how we're not even. And then he punched me in the face. I can't even tell if he really punched me in the face. It was so soft. But at the end of the day, it was we'll go on to Phoenix.
I'd hate to see the damage Chandler Smith would have done with an actual punch that landed. Speaking of, the Joe Gibbs Racing driver was fined $10,000 for that slap. More on that in a bit. Also on Wednesday, Shane Van Gisbergen appeared on the Apex Hunters United podcast and revisited his cup race at Martinsville. But before we listen to what he had to say, here's a refresher of what happened to him at the end of Sunday's race.
Okay, then don't forget what the 12 did to you earlier, all right? That's a message from Chevrolet. Copy that.
And here's what SVG had to say about it on the podcast.
And I had two guys coming up on me, and they were side by side, the 12 and the 24. And I shit, where do I go? Because you can't go three wide. There's no grip. So I just took the bottom, obviously, to help a Chevy. It's basic. And then the 12 just shipped me hard. And then I took out the 24. So it's kind of deserved, but also a bit rude by him. But I understand why it happened. But yeah, I got a call on the radio, Remember, I restarted later behind the 12, and they're like, okay, remember what the 12 did to you earlier? And I'm like, that shit still blows my mind. I understand it, it means so much to Chevy to have a car in the playoffs, but yeah, I'm not just going to go crash into someone just for the sake of it.
Oh, trust me, Shane, you're not alone. That blank blows my mind, too. Sticking with manufacturers and specifically the shenanigans at the end of Sunday's race. NASCAR handed out penalties early in the week, which included the suspensions of the three spotters and crew chiefs for Ross Chastain, Austin Dillon, and Bubba Wallace. For Dillon's spotter, Brandon Benesch, this isn't his first time to sit out in 2024. If you'll recall, he was also suspended following the last lap finish at Richmond where he told Dillon to wreck another driver. That suspension was originally 3 races, but reduced to 1 on appeal. The number 1 team was the only one to appeal the penalties this week, and it lost its appeal on Thursday. RCR withdrew its appeal, and 2311 Racing never appealed at all. The team saying it wanted to focus on the championship efforts of the number 45 car in Phoenix. Well, I totally get it. That decision resulted in a really unfortunate ending to the 2024 season and time with the organization for one key member of Bubba Wallace's crew. Last Wednesday, the team announced crew chief Booty Barker would not be returning to the number 23 in 2025. That would have meant Sunday at Phoenix would have been his final race. Instead, with the suspension, Barker's last race was Sunday in Martinsville. Obviously a less than ideal way to go out. Staying with penalties, and the one that is understandably getting a lot of attention this week is the one received by Truck Series driver Ty Majeski. On Tuesday, Election Day, the ThorSport Racing driver missed Championship 4 Media Day because he was back in Wisconsin voting in person. NASCAR fined him $12,500. On Thursday in Phoenix, he discussed the situation and what happened.
Yeah, we certainly knew about it. I didn't specifically have much communication with NASCAR prior. I let everybody internally at ThorSport handle those conversations prior to not being there on Tuesday. So, yeah, I feel like they knew our position, and yeah, kind of unprecedented. This has never happened before. You know, election day is, you know, everyone knew it was election day for a long time. And yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate circumstances for everybody. I don't think anybody wants to be put in that position, but you know, we have to have a country and a free country to race and able to race in, and that's just part of yeah, being a U.S. citizen. So I wanted to exercise that right. Yeah, I didn't know I was going to be in the championship four until you know, a few days prior. I've always, in my whole life, always been an election day vote guy. Never done an absentee ballot. Yeah, I wanted to make sure my vote was counted.
Also on Thursday, Larry McReynolds and Danielle Trotta talked about Majeski's situation, and America's crew chief had some thoughts.
So I'm seeing a couple of things that Bob has put here. Said he has always voted in person and obviously was not confirmed to be in the Champ 4 until the Friday before.
Right.
Said he talked with his team about missing it and had the okay from the team. But he went to Martinsville knowing that there's a possibility, a strong possibility, that he's probably going to advance. I don't know. I'm not – the last thing – God knows the last thing I'm going to do is condemn anybody for voting. That's an American privilege that we all need to take advantage of.
Yeah.
All for it. But still, I don't know about the state of Wisconsin, but all I know, we could do early voting here in North Carolina. I could do it right down the street from where we live for, was it 2 weeks, maybe 2+ weeks?
Up until this past Saturday.
So
it didn't close until Saturday night.
I don't know. Got to come up with something better than that for me.
To follow up on Larry's point, I looked it up, and Wisconsinites did appear to have a 2-week window of early voting. But as you heard, Majeski said it's been something he's always done, voting in person. But that's not all he said. Take a listen to this.
Yeah, we were, you know, when there was talks about, you know, when we were in the decision-making process, you know, we were informed that there was going to be some type of penalty. You know, didn't think it was going to be as much as it was. Yeah, you know, I don't know. It's now obviously never happened before. You know, we have, you know, guys taking swings at each other, and, you know, my fine is over that. So yeah, it's interesting for sure. So we plan to appeal as it stands today and see what happens.
That's right. Majeski was fined $12,500 for missing media production day, while Chandler Smith, as mentioned earlier, received a $10,000 fine for his black eye producing punch slap of Cole Custer. NASCAR has made plenty of head-scratching decisions this year, and this one ranks right up there near the top. Also yesterday, I was listening to Denny Hamlin's crew chief, Chris Gabehart, during his weekly appearance on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio. He talked about the number 11 team's race at Martinsville, and then was asked what he thought about the new softer tire Goodyear brought to the paperclip.
As to the tire, I think certainly it gave options. You saw every strategy work, whether it be staying out, whether it be 2 tires, whether it be 4 tires. Each one of them, given a situation, was able to work in different scenarios throughout the race, not just once. Whereas I think the tire that we had been on at Martinsville, everyone had kind of learned getting tires means next to nothing. You just stay out no matter what. So I definitely think it's a step in the right direction. I think playoff racing at Martinsville always adds an element of extra kind of suspense, extra options, extra opportunities, because, you know, you've got only a few cars looking for points and everybody else is just trying to win. So I'm not going to say it's, you know, fixed, quote unquote, but at the same time, I really don't know that there's anything broken. I think our society is just a constant one-up society, and, you know, I think this was a step in the right direction. But I don't know that, you know, we're ever going to find any kind of magic pill, and we probably need to quit looking.
If you saw Wednesday's Beatin' and Bangin' episode, Ryan Blaney also had good words to say about the tire at Martinsville. I think the racing showed how the tire fell off and allowed guys to pass. It was really racy. Not something we've been able to say about short tracks with a Gen 7 car, so that definitely gives me hope for 2025. Unfortunately, that quality racing product was completely lost in the playoff controversy at the end. And finally, our last story for this episode is the State of the Sport address with NASCAR President Steve Phelps and COO Steve O'Donnell. Both Steves met with the media in Phoenix today for more than 30 minutes. I'm going to share some of the highlights, but I want to begin with the opening statement from Phelps, who started off by sending a message to those fans criticizing the drivers in the Championship 4.
And a lot of chatter around the 4 that are going to compete on Sunday. I've heard some words like these: they're not deserving, you've got the wrong driver, or 2, 3, 4 drivers. What I would say is that all of our drivers knew the format, and these drivers in all 3 national series competed and went to the highest level, and they deserve to be here. So just take the Cup race, right? You have a former champion who won to get in, right, as he did last year. You have our regular season champion who won to get in here, and you have a 2-time Cup champion who won to get here. And then the young man who pointed his way through, William Byron, is an incredible talent. So all 4 of these drivers deserve to be here. Full stop.
And those were his opening remarks. Phelps also talked about the rain early in the season, rain affecting those early season TV ratings, and how ratings have improved this season. He also made a special call out to Martin Truex Jr.
Just a quick shout out. I know this is going to sound like a bit of a non sequitur, but I did want to make sure that I said something about Martin Truex and his retirement from full-time racing. Martin has been a class act. He is a clean race car driver, never dirty, and he's got a great fan base, and we will miss him. We are hopeful that he'll come back and do one-off races or participate in other ways in the sport.
A few minutes later, Phelps turned over the floor to Steve O'Donnell, who, unprompted, talked about officiating.
We've had to navigate some tough challenges throughout the year, but I will say about our group, especially those officiating each and every weekend, there is no harder sport to officiate. We don't have timeouts. We don't wait during the action. Cars going 200 miles an hour. You got to make split-second decisions. We don't always get those right, but for the most part we do. And what I'm most proud of is we come, we speak to the media, we're transparent on every single call that we make. And when there's a challenge or when we can learn from something, we're going to do that, and we're going to make adjustments like we always have. And I can tell you, I've been here almost 30 years, and every race you probably see something different. And then it's our job to react to that and come up with a new rule or come up with a new policy that we've got to go after it.
More on this in a bit. The Athletics' Jeff Gluck followed up on Phelps' opening remarks on the drivers in the Championship 4 being deserving and pointed out how none of them are leading in the major statistical categories. Phelps admitted NASCAR is always looking to tweak the playoff format, and then followed up with this.
And Steve, it's fair to say we've talked about this too. So the format is one thing, right? But playoffs, I think we're not going to go away from playoffs. So we read fans and everything. So we will, as we always do, right? And Steve's led us to this. We'll absolutely look at what form the playoffs take in the off season. You always learn, like I said before, but playoffs in and of itself, as Steve said, you cannot argue with the quality of racing that the playoffs have delivered. You can talk about the format if we do some different things, but absolutely we're going to stick with it.
A little over a minute later, O'Donnell continued talking about the playoffs when asked his thoughts on what happened at the end of the race at Martinsville.
I would argue before what we saw, one of the best races again I've seen in the playoffs. And it's unbelievable that we're sitting here talking about this topic, right? And I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, but I'll say it anyway. I've been around a long time, but Bill France used to say being pissed off is not a plan. What I saw in Martinsville pissed me off, and it pissed everyone off at NASCAR because we all know better, and we know what happened. So we do have rules in the rule book where we can address it, and we did. We had a call with our OEMs where we were very clear in what our intentions are going forward. it is true, Dustin. Do we have a rule right now where we could do something? We don't. Will we have a rule next year? 1,000%. And they're aware of that, and they're aware if anything happens this weekend, which it won't, but we will react. And then we have a meeting with our drivers on Saturday. The reason we chose not to penalize the drivers, I'll just address that now because we've seen that a lot as well. We made the decision that the drivers are holding the wheel, but the drivers were told essentially what to do. We gave them the benefit of the doubt. Saturday's message from Elton and John to the drivers will be that that's your warning. We know what happened, and going forward, we'll have to penalize you as well. But what do our words mean? We're not going to let people, drivers, teams, anyone, OEMs, challenge the integrity of the sport.
The last comment from the address that I want to address was a question by the Athletics' Jordan Bianchi. He talked about the multiple controversies in the sport this year, how it feels like it's becoming a pattern, and asked what officials were going to do about it.
Can you name one sport that doesn't have officiating questions throughout the year, right? So absolutely, every year we address those, and I think a lot of it is around technology, right? And a lot of it's around formats that you look at and different things that come into play now. So, one of the biggest ones that we saw, consistently, right, was the damaged vehicle policy. Through really no fault of trying to, in essence, save the industry money, we created a challenge in terms of how we officiate. And so that's something we want to continue to investigate. And I think one of the biggest things you want to do is how do we continue to use technology in real time to notice what may or may not be occurring on the track, address that as soon as possible. But I don't believe we have an officiating issue at all. I think we have the best and the brightest in the business. Yes, we make mistakes. They're humans. Hopefully we'll never get to just AI making calls. But we will make adjustments. And I think if me or John or Elton or Steve are not up talking before the Daytona 500 about adjustments that we've made, then we haven't done our job, because that's what we always do in the off season.
I'll be in Daytona in February, and I can promise you I will remember this remark and I will follow up with a question about it. All right, guys, that's a wrap on this episode. I want to hear what you thought about it. First, I want to hear your thoughts on Cole Custer's black eye, but more specifically, I want to know what you think about Chandler Smith getting penalized $10,000 for the punch, while Ty Majeski received a fine of $12,500 for not attending Media Day because he was voting. What did you think of Larry Mack's remarks about Majeski having the option to vote early? And I know there was a lot to digest in the State of the Sport address, but what did you think when you heard O'Donnell's statement that the playoffs aren't going away? And what did you think of his comments about being pissed off at Martinsville with what happened at the end? And lastly, what did you think of O'Donnell's thoughts on the officiating and how he doesn't believe there are any issues? I have to admit, when I heard him say this, the first thing I thought of was the old saying, the first thing in fixing a problem is admitting that you have one. All right, guys, thanks again for checking out the latest video and supporting the channel. I really appreciate it, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day and enjoy the final NASCAR weekend of 2024.